What's up, everybody, and welcome to Real Time for the Real Everyday Movie Fan. I'm Ryan Murphy. It's my great honor and privilege to be here today with Mr. Dave McMoyler, Academy Award-nominated sound effects editor in Hollywood. Mr. McMoyler, thank you so much for being on the program.
It's my pleasure, Ryan.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and get started. You are a Hollywood sound editor, and when people hear that word, first of all, I've always sort of taken issue with the title because I know it's accurate, but it doesn't tell the general public really what you're doing, because you're the sound effects creator, right? You're the guy putting all the cool stuff in there in the sound.
Yeah, well, I'm a supervising sound editor. That's my technical title. So, I mean, my primary responsibility is for most projects is to assemble a team. What I do is I have, a stable of really high level dialogue editors, sound effects editors, sound designers, and I as well like to cut myself. So I like to contribute. I usually try to find, some key scenes on every project I work on that I'll get in and actually kind of design some of the things myself. And I also really like cutting dialogue and ADR.
Yeah.
But I'll try to jump in on the critical scenes that I see. But it's for most feature films, it's basically there's a lot of work that's required. So there's, we've got sound effects, we've got dialogue and ADR, there's Foley, and depending on the show, I might even need to just have someone specifically designated for backgrounds and atmospheres. So that's sort of, a lot of it is management. It's also coming up with a game plan, getting inside the director's head, talking with him, helping him to translate, what he really sees as the most critical issues that need to be addressed, and finding the best way to do that, and hopefully surprise him. That's really what I try to do on every project, is find key moments where I bring something that maybe he didn't expect. Maybe it's a little icing on the cake, or maybe it's a slightly different way of addressing a potential problem and finding a solution.
That's great. We talk. I talk a lot about the Oscars. I know a lot of people. I just had John Pritchett on, and he was kind of like, I don't really care about the Oscars, which is, but for a lot of people, it's just the general sort of way to get the public, because people watch the Oscars. Well, maybe not so much anymore, but to get them knowledgeable as to what's going on and who's being honored. You, of course, have been nominated for an Academy Award yourself. We'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, so when they say sound editing, I remember talking with my friend, and he's like, yeah, that's just what they give an award for, the editing the sound. That's like maintenance work, because they don't understand when they hear the word. So I've always thought that they should change the name of the word to like sound effects, and it would get more people invested or anything like that. But and then you would get more people would still be watching on Oscars night, but they might not know what it is. So that's
right.
Yeah. But as far as that award goes, it's kind of interesting to me, because I was talking to some friends about this recently, that what we think of as what should be honored isn't necessarily always, when we think of sound effects, we think of Star Wars, stuff like that. This past year, we had like Avengers Infinity War and some big action movies, and the movies that were nominated were the movie about the nanny, Roma, and Bohemian Rhapsody won it, which makes sense for like sound mixing. But I was very confused about sound effects or sound editing. Could you shed some light on why films like that would be not honored like that for that?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Ryan, because in terms of the general voting block of the Academy, the way it works is basically for each branch, basically we are the ones that come up with the nominees. So basically in sound, basically that encompasses sound editors and sound mixers, both production mixers and re-recording mixers. Basically, they're the ones that decide, we think that these are the best, these represent the best of what we did in this last year. So they're the ones that basically vote for the nominees. And then it goes to the general public, or the general membership of the Academy, to actually decide from those nominees which one gets the award. And, sometimes, I actually think Bohemian Rhapsody was a really great movie, and it was really well mixed. And a lot of it has to do with, because I believe it was a combination of Freddie Mercury's vocals and Rami's vocals, and the way to get those to kind of integrate and sound seamless and to believe it That's a task. It is an important task. I think traditionally the Academy, the general public, or the general voting block of the Academy, sometimes they'll look at a musical and they'll think, oh, musical, so that's sound. That's sound. Oh, okay, I'm going to vote for that one. And I've seen that over the years sometimes being a little frustrating for me because, there's a lot of work that goes into pretty much every project I've worked on. And one of the things is if we're doing as a sound editor, sound designer, you mentioned the big blockbuster Marvel type movies. Those are obviously, you've got a planet blowing up. Mm-hmm. That's something that obviously that's a sound that somebody found, designed, and basically is using in the mix. But there's a lot of work that goes into every film to smooth out the edges. I mean, in terms of dialogue editing, a lot of times, depending on where they shot and what they had to deal with in terms of background noises and generators, wind machines, that kind of stuff, there's a lot of work. Most directors, their priority is they want to keep as much of what they recorded on the day as possible. So that production, they got the performance they wanted, they got everything they wanted. If there are technical problems, it's incumbent on us to find and employ every tool possible to preserve what they shot. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes we have to bring the actor back in and we have to loop. So then it's a matter of helping to set it up so that we don't get in the way, and we help the actor get back into that moment that he had on the day, on the set, or on location, so that he can find that moment again. And then to cut it so that it's perfectly in sync and that you'll never know that we went in and did anything. And that's sort of the role of a supervising sound editor, is to basically help create the most tangible, the most immersive sound possible, but to make it so that no one knows we did anything, so that it just seems like, oh, that's the way this is supposed to sound. It just seems appropriate. I worked on a film earlier this year called 5 Feet Apart, and I think it's a beautiful film, and it's about it's a love story between two kids who have cystic fibrosis, and they meet in the hospital. One of the cruelest aspects of the disease is you are not supposed to get within 6 feet of another patient who suffers from the disease. You can trade bacteria, and basically that's it. And one of the critical things for this was to come up with a cough that would sound like it was resonant, it was in the chest, it rattling around, because the CF cough is the director, Justin Baldoni, wonderful guy, who really, really has spent a lot of time with these kids. He knows a lot about the personal struggles that a lot of these kids that have this disease are suffering through. And he said, it's a really, really important sound. So I knew at that point, that's the most important sound probably for me in this movie, is to come up with it. And so it was a combination of doing some recording, and I actually had some old recordings I did of myself when I had pneumonia, probably 10 years ago. And I kind of pulled some of those out of the closet and put those in. But again,
yourself when you're suffering, so you knew you were going to be a sound editor one day, and just let me get this cough.
This phlegm could come in handy sometime. This phlegm. So but it's a type of thing that if to the viewer, they're never going to know I did anything. And so that's yeah. So I like to say sometimes I think of sound editors as being the Rodney Dangerfields of the industry, because we get no respect. But that's why I appreciate you doing this, to create awareness.
That's great. And as far as we can go back in time, as far as how you got involved in this world, how does one enter into the industry, and what piqued your interest in the first place?
Well, I've always been interested in sound. I mean, back when I was a kid, I had a paper route. One of the first things I bought was a little cassette recorder, and I just loved putting together my own little sound montages with that. And I remember one of my crown jewels at the time was I basically, the old microphones, they had like a little on-off switch on the mic where you go in and out of pause. And I learned that if I did that right, I could get like a kind of a weird like ramping sound, so that it wasn't playing at full velocity the whole time. It would kind of jump in and out. And I put together a thing of a montage of burps using that, and it ended up kind of sounding like aliens talking. And it was like I kept that for a long time. I actually should see if I can find that, because maybe I could use that in a movie sometime. But anyway, I was always interested in sound. I studied film in college at a smaller school up in Northern California called Humboldt State University. But they had a film department, and it was easy access. It was like I knew my original plan. I was going to get my general ed out of the way there and then transfer down to one of the schools down here in Southern California. But what happened was within like the first, while with a lot of other colleges, you've got to go through a lot of theory and criticism before you can even get your hands on a camera. This is where I could jump right in and start doing stuff. And, I enjoyed all aspects. I enjoyed shooting. I did some camera work. I did picture editorial. I cut all my own films. But I really, really enjoyed sound. And when I graduated and came down to LA, I worked for about 5 years doing kind of everything. I was a jack of all trades. So I did some camera work. I did some editorial. I even did a little bit of directing and writing for some. They're all non-union, very, very low budget things. But a friend of mine got into sound, and I had worked with him on a few things, and I had actually helped him build soundtracks on a couple of his projects. He got exclusively into sound editorial, mostly for TV. And he said, "Hey, there's an opening here. Why don't you come over?" And I was like, "Okay." At the time, it was like it was a way to get into the union. And my original plan was, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get my union card, and then I want to get back into probably picture editing. But the thing is, I just really loved it. I found that I was pretty good at it when it came down to it. And so it's just been my joy, actually, to be involved in this industry for as long as I have.
That's terrific. If that's Spielberg calling, you can go ahead and pick it up. I don't. Yeah. Okay. I didn't want to be responsible.
No, if it was Spielberg, I would have done this.
Yeah. But then we, just going through like a little bit of a timeline here. You started out, one of the first things that pops up on your IMDb page, as far as anything that we've heard of today, is In the Heat of the Night. We worked on that television show for about a year, it looks like. Okay. And then one of the 4 episodes of Lonesome Dove, which my brother-in-law would be thrilled that I'm, talking to you, because that's his favorite movie, even though I remind him it's not technically a movie.
It was pretty good. I think some of the best, definitely some of the best American TV that's ever been produced.
Yeah.
It was a real honor to work on that.
And you just came in there was like one guy who did it, and then you just came in for one episode to do one episode.
Well, there were 4 episodes. So basically it was a lot of work per episode. So, and the timeline in terms of delivery, it was like one on top of the other. So within the company that I was working for at the time, there were 4 supervisors that we each took one of the episodes. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, you get into movies and we see stuff pop up like Homeward Bound. Man, how'd you make the animals talk? No. Then The Crow, obviously a huge cult hit. I kind of hate to ask, but were you already working on the film when Brandon Lee passed?
No, we got called in. Basically, they were really, for several months, they weren't really sure they were going to finish the film. I mean, it was devastating to the crew, to the director, to everyone. And it was actually, I believe it was his wife, Brandon's wife, that basically said, "Would you please finish this film?" Because they saw his performance, and it was going to be a game changer for him. I think it would have really, catapulted him into, on the way to superstar status. And so basically, I think they had shut down for about 3, 4, or 6 months, and then when they decided they wanted to come back, I got involved, and it was challenging. It was challenging because not like there are a lot of I think bordering on urban legend about how cursed the whole production was. And there were, it was kind of a union oversight. They basically, anyway, I don't want to get into that.
Right.
But it was, and we did have a couple things. I know at one point we were mixing on a weekend, and we were getting close to finishing it up, and there was an earthquake, and it was pretty bad. It didn't completely knock out the mixing stage, but it was like speakers were knocked over, and it was just like, uh-oh, does somebody not want us to finish this movie? But it was, I was really proud of the way it turned out, and I'm glad that we were able to help, create a tribute for Brandon.
It was great.
Yeah.
And then you sometimes come across stuff that you're just like, oh wow, I had not thought about that film in a long time. And I'm looking at your filmography and like, oh my God, Star Kid. And I click on, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was Manny Cotto who they made that movie
yeah.
Star Trek in 24.
Yeah.
That was crazy. But that film was actually kind of ahead of its time, because that was like, looking back on it now, I remember they had the close-ups of the face in the helmet. Like, it was Iron Man before Iron Man, 11 years.
Yeah.
It's a very forward-thinking movie. We should all go back and watch it.
Yeah, and Manny was very. It was a low budget movie. He didn't have a lot to work with, either in production or post production. But he was very inventive, and it was fun coming up with the cyber suit, the treatment for when the kid was inside the thing, and then the thing on that was we wanted to come up with a sound for his body that was metal. He was obviously in metal, but it also was somewhat malleable and almost liquid. So that was fun. A lot of R&D on that one.
Yeah. And then, so if anyone is wondering at this point how I decide on anyone to interview, basically I always look to talk to people who have been involved in my favorite movies. And of course, you were involved in one of my absolute all-time favorite movies, which is The Mask of Zorro. You were the supervising sound editor. That is the film that you received your Oscar nomination for. I actually wrote I included the sound effects in that movie in a paper I wrote in a film sound class. I had noticed that paper's got to be in my parents' basement still somewhere. But I had noticed, I think I had watched The Three Musketeers, the crappy '93 movie with Charlie Sheen, and I had noticed that the sword fights in that movie were sort of like tink 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 tink, and then I guess I had watched The Mask of Zorro, and the first thing I noticed was it was this much more resonant, clanging, echoey, like whang, sort of thing, and it made it much more exciting. And I thought, damn, that's why I included that in my paper about film sound. And I remember thinking, like, that's probably what got him the Oscar nomination. Right there. But yeah, I mean, what was that experience like? We were in such an extraordinary.
It was well, the swords in particular. I worked with a sound designer on that movie called. His name is Hector Gica, and Hector really he went deep. He went really deep, and we, as you say, we didn't want it to just sound. Sorry, Steven Spielberg, stop bothering me. We basically we didn't want it to just sound like a standard, the same sound for each hit, or even slight variations. There were certain impacts or certain thrusts that really we felt like this one's got to have something special. So it was a matter of going through libraries and coming up with the sounds, recording some wild sounds on the Foley stage that we then ended up incorporating. But Hector, we came up with, on some of the hits, they're non-detectable because that would be showing our brushwork, but there are animal sounds. There's some growls that we had, strategically placed, again, to make certain thrusts or certain strikes really kind of stick out. But it was, it was Hector, and then it was also the re-recording mixers, Greg Russell and Kevin O'Connell.
Those guys, no. If you know anything about, if you're into it, those are like two of the most famous names.
Yeah. It was the whole thing that was really kind of a dream project. It was. I remember basically instead of going and watching the whole movie, which normally we would do if I'm hired, we'd go over and there'd be a spotting where we'd watch the whole film from beginning to end. On this one, just I think partially because of the schedule the picture editor was dealing with, it basically was reel by reel. It would be, I'd come over. Okay, so Monday, can you come over? We're going to look at reel 1, and then a couple of days later, I looked at reel 2, and every day, every reel I looked at, it was like Christmas. It was like, I can't wait to come up with the sound for that. And one of the other really fun aspects of that movie was the horse and the horse vocals. We wanted that horse to have his own personality, and to kind of, he was at times kind of giving Zorro a hard time. So like I said, everything in that, and the other thing that for me that was so fun in that movie was the big finale with the mine exploding.
I'll say something about that, but go ahead.
And Martin Campbell, who's the director, who amazing director, and I think for action films in particular, he's the best. They shot it in Mexico. They actually had to shoot the mine exploding 3 times because he never got quite what he wanted. And there's like 3 aspects of it. If you watch the film, there's the initial flame, there's a big fireball that comes, and then there's then the next phase, it goes into like the wood structures, all the timbers breaking and things shattering that way. And then the final one, the long shot, is basically a whole mountainside just basically collapsing on itself. And again, it was like, I remember when I watched that in the spotting, when we watched the reel, it's like, oh, I can't wait. I cannot wait to get my hands on this and start playing with sounds for this. That was a really great project.
I think some people are actually surprised and like, really, they didn't just record the horse neigh and go, that's cool, that's a horse, or they didn't just record the explosion and be like, that's the explosion. Like everything's got to be, yeah, everything's got to be done. Everything's
selected and designed, and yeah, you try to. The other thing on that movie that we did, I mentioned the animal sweeteners for sword hits. We also, in that big finale with the mountain and the mine exploding, there's quite a few animal sounds in there. To my mind, I wish we would have played them a little lower because they kind of stick out a little bit. But Martin loved them. Martin and he would hear those. He goes, "Hey, I need a cougar. Let's put that cougar in here." And I was like, "Really? Okay." But can't argue with the results. It did give me a nomination.
Yeah, there you go. I can't argue with that. But that's what I was going to mention is that there's I think a sound at one point in that explosion where it's kind of like a signature sound. It's almost like the Wilhelm scream. It's like it's this cat thing that just kind of, I think it's when like a piece of wood flies up towards the screen and you just hear that, and it's like I know that effect. That's so.
There's
I don't know if that's.
I always use the tiger on some of the big billowy flames. We use kind of a lower. And then on some of the stuff that's flying through, we use the cougar.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite moments in that, though, it's one of the timbers. It's one of the shots towards the end, and it's a kind of a low angle shot. And there's a timber that kind of tumbles through, and we used a bull roar for that. Which, again, hopefully, hopefully it worked for other people. It definitely, I remember when I found it, it was just like, oh, that's perfect.
I'm gonna have to, edit all this in so, when we do the video. So it'd be cool to have people see it. Obviously, we're nominated for an Oscar. That your only time going to the Oscars? That time you were nominated, and
yes.
Then and then obviously now you were a Steven Spielberg production, Mask of Zorro. And he's pretty involved when he does stuff like that. So I'd imagine you got to meet him. And then you lost to another Spielberg film, which you can hardly complain about losing to Saving.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. At least, it was I think it was a pretty tough field that year.
yeah.
And say, if you lose, it's good to lose to the best. And that Saving Private Ryan is it's an amazing, amazing soundtrack.
Here are the 3 films nominated this year for sound effects editing.
We're gonna hit!
George Waters II for Armageddon. David McMoyler for The Mask of Zorro. Gary Rydstrom and Richard Hims for Saving Private Ryan. And the Oscar for sound effects editing goes to Gary Rydstrom and Richard Hims for Saving Private Ryan.
One of the reasons is that at least for the first 11 minutes of the film, the storming of the beach, there's no music. It's all effects, which is that's a sound editor, supervising sound editor's dream. It's just not to have to mess with the pesky music.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that was a great year. O'Connell and Russell were nominated against themselves as well for Armageddon. Right. So,
right.
But yeah, Spielberg.
Spielberg, by the way, he came by the stage. I did meet him briefly, but he also gave me a really nice bottle of Cristal for the for the nomination, which was very nice.
That answers that question. So obviously you've worked on many movies since then. Many movies with more with Martin Campbell, Robert Schwentke. You've made several movies with, and several with David R. Ellis, who's sadly no longer with us. Yeah, and one of the highlights of his career and yours is, of course, I Have Had It with These Mothers. So, Snakes on a Plane. We're going to talk about sound effects, and you're going to talk about the horse neighing. I mean, I got to hear about the snakes. If you go through that much trouble to make a horse sound good, tell us about the snakes and Snakes on a Plane.
Yeah, no, it was that was a fun one. That was and on that one I had the help of another really talented sound designer, Harry Cohen. And Harry normally is totally booked, and on that one it just our schedules lined up where I was able to have him come in. He wasn't able to stay on for the whole project, but I said, Harry, I need help with these snakes. I need your touch. So yeah, it was he recorded a lot of stuff himself. I think a lot of the vocals are things that Harry did vocally himself. I've got a few in there as well. But it was a matter of just we also have, at the time I worked for a company called Sound Deluxe, which I was with them for 23 years. Sadly, they're no longer around. But the library that we had some great raw material to draw from in that, and it was that was a fun one. And yeah, David it's a real shame that David's no longer with us. He was a great guy.
That's all great. And really just when you move. Okay, here's something. So you have a relationship with Martin Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I think you've stuck with his best films. You weren't involved with some of his lesser. You weren't involved, oddly enough, with The Legend of Zorro, which
right.
Probably for the best. I mean, these films and Green Lantern, these films were actually handled by very great editors themselves, Alan Robert Murray and Bob Assman, Paul Berg, Barry Baker Landers. When a movie like those does not receive a lot of critical acclaim, but it doesn't reflect poorly on the sound guy, right? Like, it might reflect on the writers, stuff like that. No one's going to be like, I didn't like Green Lantern, so don't hire Per Hallberg.
Right.
But that brings up an interesting question of, when you take on a project, would it, obviously you take it's probably a mixture of what's available, the payment, and who you want to work with, those three factors. But would it bother, would you be excited to work on something that maybe you didn't think was the best, but gave a lot of really cool opportunities for sound in terms of like something like, oh, well, maybe the movie is, isn't all the great, but hey, I get to do this. Would that be something that would bother? Is that something that has bothered you on films?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Martin Campbell, the film I did after Mask of Zorro, Vertical Limit, which I have to say, personally, I mean, Mask of Zorro is definitely up there, and it's probably my zenith. But Vertical Limit I'm really proud of the sound job in that. I really, really am proud. The story didn't quite hold together. It's just
I haven't seen that one, so I'm, but
it's
yeah.
well, I mean, it's entertaining. It's entertaining, but it's one of the premises is there's a climbing a group that gets trapped in a crevasse, and there's an avalanche. They're covered in, and so there's at base camp. They're like, okay, we're going to go up. We're going to rescue them. And it's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take nitroglycerin up, and we're going to go up, and and it's like, wait, back up. What did you say? Nitro.
My brother's got explosives. Says they're gonna blast their way down.
Strap on the nitro.
But nitro, how's that gonna? So it the premise was a little bit shaky, but some great set pieces. And like I said, I had a lot of fun on that one. But I'm trying to think if there's ever a movie that I turned down because I just didn't think it was good enough. There's a few that I ended up having to do that I maybe wish I hadn't. but I think in every project there are challenges and there are opportunities, and that's the whole thing. Is just in every show I look for a way to try something that I haven't tried before, or create a sound that maybe people haven't heard before. So even on the crappy films, you can find those opportunities.
Oh yeah, there's one franchise that shall remain nameless that that features abominable scripts and abominable films that is continually nominated at the Oscars because they're very technically extraordinary. Starts with a T. Anyway, so for you have a film. And we could go on this repertoire here. So there's movies, but ultimately, you have a movie coming out. Which is Greyhound with Tom Hanks.
Right.
I believe it's a World War II movie. Yeah. Tom Hanks in World War II. What an odd thing.
Who thought of that?
I buy it. But before we send you off, why don't you tell us about Greyhound and promote it? I mean, I should get a check from the studio, but let's talk.
It's as you say, it's Tom Hanks, and he's it's a slightly different character than he's played before, and it's based on a historical novel by E.M. Forster, and it had quite an audience going in. Tom actually wrote the script, and I remember when the first screening I had before I started working on it, it can get very confusing because he wanted to stay technically very correct. And basically all of the communication between the bridge where the captain is and down below the CIC where all the information about where any other vessels are that might be a threat, or the vessels that are in the convoy that they're protecting. It's that. And then there's communication between him. He's the commander of an escort group that is escorting a convoy that's going across the Northern Sea. And he's got to talk to all the different captains on the different escort ships. So it was a lot of stuff going on, and it was technically correct. Where basically Tom Hanks would give a command in the bridge, and then the talker, who was the guy behind him, who would pass that on to somebody else. So he would say it, and then about a second and a half later, it would be repeated. And it's just like, first time I heard it, I was just like, wait a minute, do we have too many tracks open? Stuff's doubled up here. This dialogue, it's like, oh no, that's the way it is. And it was part of the challenge that he had as a commander, is to keep everyone focused, even though there's all this, competing dialogue and all this different strains of communication that were overlapping each other. But it's a great movie. What's really interesting about it is they shot it, basically there was an actual destroyer that's very similar to the one that's in the movie, that's in Baton Rouge, basically in a lagoon in Baton Rouge, and it's there. I guess there's as a museum. They shot for about a week on that craft, and then the rest was all shot on a stage. And there actually is not, from what they actually shot, there's not one drop of water. And I saw, basically they're still working on the visual effects there, and I think we're going to be coming back and doing a little spice some things up, make stuff look a little cooler. But I have to say, the progress that they made on the visual effects from the time I started to the time that we completed our mix, it looks amazing. It really looks amazing. And I think the visual effects is going to be probably getting some nominations on this one, and they should. Yeah, and it was great working with Tom and his partner Gary Getzman.
So you work with Tom because he must have been a producer of some kind.
He's a producer from Playtone, and like I said, he wrote it. So we brought all the actors in to do our ADR or looping.
Oh, so that's when you would meet the actors. So
yeah,
I hear like you never meet actors, but if you're the guy, of course.
It's that was, and it's great. Tom is he's a real mensch, and he's very, very, because this was his script. He was very, very meticulous in terms of detail, but also just very collaborative and very appreciative of everything that we did. So yeah, you should see it. I guess it's not going to come out for another year because they want to time it with the 50th anniversary of VJ Day.
Yeah, I think it's May 15th of May 8th of 2020. So looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So and there's a lot of other stuff here, but we're over 30 minutes now. So ultimately, it's a great pleasure to have you on the program, Mr. McMoyler. I just want to thank you for everything you've done in the business, and thanks for
you, Ryan. I appreciate this, and on behalf of my colleagues, I just having people that kind of try to get the word out about us hardworking guys. It's well appreciated.
All right. Well, folks, that'll do us all today. That'll be all for us today. I'm flustered. I can't even talk now.
We'll loop it. We'll loop that.
We'll loop it. Okay. That'll do it for us today. Mr. Dave McMoyler, and please let us know your thoughts. And as always, thank you for keeping it real with ReelTime.
Okay. Take care.